Hi, I'm Courtney. Welcome to my garden, where today I'm going to show you the things I've been doing for the past 10 years to successfully grow tomatoes and peppers in the garden. And this year I'm going to show you how I'm planting them in this 8-foot by 2-foot raised bed. For the past 10 years, I've been trying to grow as many tomatoes and peppers as I possibly could to make sauce and salsa for an entire year for the family. But this year has changed and we're moving, so I'm paring way down. And I'm trying to focus on growing tomatoes and peppers just for fresh eating, like fresh salsa, fresh sauce, and salads and pasta salads and things like that. So before, I was growing 8 or 9 4x8 raised beds of tomatoes with 4 plants in each bed and 3 to 5 beds of peppers. So now I'm pared down to 1 raised bed, which is absolutely very different for me. But I think I chose varieties that are going to be really versatile. One of them is Midnight Roma tomatoes. I got those from Row 7 Seeds, and my favorite purple jalapenos from Eden Brothers. These are mini bell peppers from Eden Brothers, and I'm not really sure, since I've never grown them before, how big they're going to get, but I only have 3 pepper plants in here. I found that giving them enough space allows the plants to thrive, and you actually get more peppers with less plants. In a 4x8 raised bed, I would put 12 pepper plants, which gave them plenty of room to thrive and just produce a lot of peppers. I think these 3 plants with this amount of space are really going to produce nicely. Wow, they're like going nuts back here because they want strawberries. All right. Yeah, you guys are looking for all the strawberries, aren't you? Yes, you are. So let's get planting. I'm going to show you guys the tricks. Well, they're not really tricks. They're just simple things that I've used over the years. After some trial and error, I've figured out what works in my garden to successfully grow tomatoes and peppers. It's nothing crazy like special pruning or anything like that. Just very simple, low maintenance things. I'm going to plant one of these Midnight Roma tomatoes first, and I didn't pot these up, but they're at the point of needing to be transplanted or potting up because they're getting a little bit leggy. I actually hardened these off like, I don't know, 3 or 4 weeks ago outside, and I just haven't had a chance to plant them outside until now, but they're going to take right off when they get planted. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to remove the bottom. I'm going to plant these pretty deep, since they are a little bit leggy. This soil I talked about in my previous video about how I fill my raised beds. I source it from a local business, and it's mixed with their topsoil and mushroom compost. And I trust that local business. I know exactly where everything comes from, so I know that this soil doesn't have any persistent chemicals in it that's going to harm my plants. And I've been growing in this soil in my raised beds for the past 11 years. These Midnight Roma tomato plants are semi-determinate, which means they'll have a bushier, determinate growth habit, so they're not going to go completely crazy like indeterminate tomato plants are. They're going to be fine staked up to this trellis that I just made with these T-posts and cattle panel. And it doesn't look super neat like some of them that you see on the internet, but I just kind of threw it together in a matter of minutes and used zip ties to hook it together, and it's gonna work just fine for these tomato plants, I think. I just happened to pound this into the ground because our soil is solid red clay, so it's kind of like free concrete. Now for the second Midnight Roma tomato plant. This is so weird, just to be planting 2 tomato plants. It feels really weird, but it's kind of a relief with everything else going on, selling the house and moving and everything like that. We're still gonna have some really good fresh tomatoes to eat, even though we're not gonna be canning and making sauce and everything. Just gonna remove the seed leaves on the bottom and plant them pretty deep. Look at Kit Kit. She absolutely loves it out here. She just takes little snoozes out here. Kit Kit, you love the garden, don't you? Aww. She's so sweet. When the audio stopped working yesterday, I was just about to plant the peppers, and I have 3 plants planted. Here are the mini bells right here, and the purple jalapenos. The pepper plants I didn't plant quite as deep as the tomato plants because they weren't super leggy. So these pepper plants are about a foot apart, maybe a little bit more. There's less chance of disease when there's plenty of airflow between the plants. So that's why I went about this spacing right here. As the plants grow, if I figure out that there's extra space, I might tuck in a couple of basil plants just to use the space effectively. The next thing I did was I planted this Indeterminate tomato plant in this 10-gallon grow bag. And if you're going to be planting Indeterminate tomato plants in containers, I would recommend at least 10 gallons. And I use this cattle panel cage right here. I just placed it around the grow bag. This is what I use to cage my tomato plants in the 4x8 beds when I have my cattle panel trellis in the middle, and they work quite well. We get high winds in our yard, so I always have to have my tomato plants sufficiently caged. The recipe that I use for my grow bags is 75% potting soil and 25% mushroom compost, and then I mix in wool pellets, and wool pellets help the soil retain moisture because grow bags just happen to dry out quicker, so you have to water more. Adding wool pellets, they hold 20 times their weight in water, so they help the soil retain moisture, but they also wick water away if you have heavy rains and the soil becomes soggy. So they're effective at wicking away moisture from the root system as well. I use Happy Frog potting soil. I've used it for the past 10 years, starting my seeds and in containers, and I like it because it's a nice rich potting soil, but it also drains really well. I wanted to show you guys the herbs that we planted in these 10-gallon grow bags in one of my recent videos where we applied the Rain Point solar irrigation system. These herbs are thriving in the grow bags, and we've harvested plenty of basil and parsley from them. I think the Indeterminate tomato plant that we just planted in the 10-gallon grow bag using this same soil recipe, I think it's going to thrive just fine, and I actually will probably hook it up to this irrigation system too, especially when it gets drier outside. So the next thing I did after I got everything planted was I added a nice thick layer of mulch on top of everything, and this helps the soil retain moisture, and it also helps keep weeds out. I use pine straw to mulch because it's really easy for me to get here. I can get it back behind the woods, and local businesses always have it in stock here. But you can use any natural mulch that's easy for you to get that works well in your garden. The other thing mulch does for peppers and tomatoes is it helps keep soil from splashing up onto the leaves when it rains, and that helps reduce disease, which is helpful because tomatoes and peppers happen to be susceptible to disease. The next thing I did was I watered these plants in really well with fish emulsion, and I just take about a tablespoon of liquid fish emulsion and add it to my watering can, and I water them in really well, and that helps give them a little nitrogen boost, which helps them really take off and helps prevent transplant shock. I usually do that a couple more times after transplanting, once a week, just to make sure that they really take off. I don't really do anything after that. I might side dress every few weeks with mushroom compost because compost is such a great fertilizer. The wool pellets I added to the soil are also a natural slow release fertilizer that lasts throughout the whole entire growing season. I'm probably going to support these pepper plants just using some small cages like the ones that you find at the store that are labeled tomato cages, and those will work just fine for these. I never use them on tomato plants though, because in the past they just have not worked for me. They're not as good of a support, but I think with these smaller pepper plants, they're gonna work fine. Another key to successful tomato and pepper plant harvest is pruning. And I don't really do anything super crazy. I don't do anything super complicated at all. I don't top my tomato or pepper plants. The only thing I do for my pepper plants, I really honestly don't even prune them. I just make sure that there's no foliage touching the ground, so I might prune the very bottom of the plant. I usually do harvest some of the peppers early when they're still green because they're fine to eat, because I find that to kind of give production a boost. The more peppers you harvest throughout the season, the more peppers the plants are going to produce. I did a whole entire video last summer about pruning tomato plants. It really depends on the variety, whether they're indeterminate or determinate, but for both types, I prune everything from the bottom because I don't want any of the foliage touching the ground. I really do not prune my determinate tomato plants much at all. I don't remove suckers unless I see that there's an issue with airflow, because airflow is also important to help prevent diseases. The thing about determinate plants is they're going to produce as much fruit as they're going to produce the whole entire season right up front. They're not going to keep producing fruit like indeterminate plants do. So if you prune determinate plants too much, you're actually going to reduce the amount of tomatoes that you get. Indeterminate plants are different. They go absolutely crazy. They'll get to be like 6 to 10 feet tall if you let them go. They're going to keep producing fruit for the whole entire season. But I still don't go too crazy pruning my indeterminate plants. I'll just keep an eye on them, you know, of course, to make sure that nothing is touching the ground, but I'll keep an eye on the suckers. You know, I might remove some of them to improve airflow and to keep the plant kind of contained. One really important thing about pruning though is that if you see any leaves that are starting to look yellow and diseased, remove those right away because diseases on tomato and pepper plants can spread really quickly. Consistent watering is really important for tomato plants and pepper plants. One of the main things that inconsistent watering causes is blossom end rot, and I've had lots of issues with that in my garden throughout the years. One of the things I've found to really help that is adding soaker hoses or drip irrigation. You can even set those up to timers to make sure that consistent water is applied throughout the whole entire week, every week. Of course, you can't control that when it rains a lot. Another thing you can't really control when it rains is the foliage on the plants getting wet, but mulching helps the soil from splashing up. When you're watering yourself, like with a hose or drip irrigation, you want to make sure that the water is administered right at the base of the plant so that deep watering happens, and that helps the root system really develop and grow deep, and then the plant can take up as much nutrients as it needs to. So if you're watering directly with a hose, I would recommend slow and deep watering if at all possible, but I would definitely highly recommend soaker hoses and drip irrigation because that just helps keep everything consistent and nice, slow and deep watering for you. Choosing the right variety of tomato and pepper plants in your garden also really helps out with good harvests. First, obviously choosing the varieties that match your taste preferences and how you're going to be eating them is a good start. Do you want to can your tomatoes for sauce? Do you want to make fresh salsa? Are you just going to be eating them fresh mostly? Then choosing varieties that match your space helps too. There are definitely more compact varieties for containers and smaller growing spaces, and there are some varieties that will quickly take over your space, especially with indeterminate tomatoes. So planting your tomato and pepper plants accordingly so that they have enough space to thrive is definitely an important key. Also, if you research varieties, some varieties just do well in some regions over others. Like down here, I've been growing Skyway tomatoes for the past, I don't know, like 6 years or so because they do really well here in the southeast and in my microclimate. They're a field tomato variety. They have really good flavor, but they also do well in heat and humidity, and they have no problem setting fruit when it gets to be 90 degrees and above. So there might be some varieties out there that are specific to your climate. If you live in a really hot and dry climate where there's constant intense sun, planting your plants in a spot where it's easy to apply shade fabric might be helpful, especially for pepper plants. Sometimes they can suffer from sun scald. I've never actually had that happen in my garden, but I know there are lots of areas, especially like in the southwestern United States, where lots of gardeners use shade fabric. To recap, here are 8 simple things that you can do in your garden for successful tomato and pepper harvest. Number 1, planting in healthy soil. Number 2, planting deeply, especially with tomato plants. Number 3, mulching really well. Number 4, providing adequate support. Number 5, applying appropriate fertilizer. Number 6, pruning as needed, but not going too crazy. Number 7, applying consistent water. And number 8, choosing the right varieties for your microclimate and your growing space. I had a couple of extra pepper seedlings, so I stuck a couple of them in my square foot raised garden bed here to see how they're going to do, and I'll be able to fit a couple of small cages in here to support their growth. But they're right in front of these cucumber plants right here and right next to lettuce, and I have some open squares right here that I'm going to succession plant some lettuce in soon. So this is the 2x8 garden bed that I put together on Sunday, filled up on Monday, planted on Friday, and here we are on Saturday, and the plants are starting to thrive and grow. It's a really satisfying feeling knowing that you can grow a good amount of food in a considerably small amount of space. It's a pretty easy thing to do from start to finish, and I know that you can do it too.